And into Mississippi this summer, upwards of 1,000 students from all around the country who will engage in what we're calling freedom schools, community center programs, voter registration activities, and in general, a program designed to open up Mississippi to the country.
That was a scene from the upcoming documentary, Freedom Summer, premiering on PBS June 24th. The person in that scene is Bob Moses, then just 29 years old, and leader of the 1964 Freedom Summer campaign. In the 50 years since, Moses has continued his civil rights work, and I am honored to welcome Bob Moses to the show. Also with us is Judith Brown-Dianis, co-director of the Advancement Project. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks. Yeah.
I want to ask you about models of leadership that move from the bottom up. The idea of king-based leadership, I think, is often how we think of what the civil rights movement is, the big speeches on the big stages.
Right.
Talk to me about what you learned in the context of organizing for Freedom Summer about bottom up.
Yeah. So really, the person who first demonstrated that was Ella. So Ella Baker, yeah. So what she did was provide a space for the student sit-in leaders. And she helped them become the people who owned their movement, right? So what was happening, remember there was the NACP, SCLC, and CORE. So those organizations would have preferred a youth wing of an adult organization. But Ella really held off Wilkins, King, and Farmer, right, and insisted that the students had the right to make their own mistakes, so to speak.
And that's pretty formidable, the idea of Baker holding on. I mean, the names that you give there are folks who helped to change the country.
Right.
And yet the idea that she holds them off to develop a different model of leadership.
Right, exactly. It was really crucial. And we learned something about what it meant to be an organizer through that, namely that part of the work of organizing was that you create a space for leadership to emerge, a space for something to emerge that you are not going to be the leader of, right? So we took that idea into Mississippi. The big example of that, of course, is the Freedom Democratic Party and Fannie Lou Hamer.
Talk to me about when you say that you're going to create something that you will not be the leader of, because I do, when I think about the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, I think about Fannie Lou Hamer there in Atlantic City talking to the Credentials Committee of the DNC, but you're telling me that is a different model of what constitutes who was leading.
Well, in order for Fannie Lou Hamer to emerge as the media person, right, then the media space had to be open. So part of this issue of organizing is that there are a lot of... So, for example, if you look through Jet magazine from 1961 right up to 1964, right, you don't see pictures from Mississippi of SNCC people who are leading, right? So you see pictures of people that SNCC is working with, right, who get projected, right? So keeping the media space open so it's a lot of little decisions, right? So actually there was a space there because there's only so much media space, right? And so when somebody entered in, right, and so there was a space there that Mrs. Hamer walked into.
So help me then to think about that. If I'm connecting that, for example, to the work that Judith Brown-Dianis and the Advancement Project are doing, or that Moral Mondays is doing in North Carolina right now, has this model of leadership, a Baker, Hamer, Moses model of leadership that says we go in and we build community, we make space, but we don't become the leaders.
Right.
Has that been lost, or is that still happening?
So that's a big question, right? So we have a lot of media figures. There's only so much media space in the country. I mean, what I think about it, we only had 3 television stations, right, during the 60s. So King occupied one media space, and then Malcolm occupied the other media space. And when Malcolm was assassinated, of course, the question was, well, who's going to occupy that space, right? So eventually, Stokely Carmichael and Black Power, right, occupied that space, right? And you can trace from then now who has occupied which spaces, right? I mean, for some extent, Obama occupies the space that King occupied then, right?
That's an interesting way of putting it. Not that President Obama is king. Obviously, he's the president, but the way in which that version of leader in African American man body
Right.
is a space that has to be filled.
That has to be filled, right? Yeah. So my only experience now is with the Algebra Project, right? So we've been using algebra as an organizing tool, just like we use voting as an organizing tool.
And that's exactly what I want to come back and talk to you on. So hold it for me for 1 second. We're going to take a quick commercial break because I think it's going to take a moment to explain to people why algebra is a civil rights issue and how the Algebra Project constitutes part of a long tradition of civil rights organizing. So stick with us, and I'm also going to bring you in on this, Judith, as soon as we come back.
AT&T introduces the rugged Galaxy S5 Active. Stands up to
The gap begins to close. Really? Who wants to look backwards when you can?
Passion is our passion. With your raving, the Grand Budapest Hotel is Wes Anderson about issues that matter to you, like early education,
Always easy, kept us on course.
access to healthcare, and ending gun violence. Come visit MSNBC at the 20th anniversary of the Essence Festival, July 4th to 6th. Learn more at msnbc.com/growing hope.
In Bob Moses' book, Radical Equations, he writes, "We were organizers, local people, local leadership was at the center of everything we did. Keeping that in mind, and it wasn't always easy, kept us on course. Local folks might not be paying us, but we were working for them." And so that is that model of a different kind of leadership. Explain to me how the equations part of Radical Equations. What is the Algebra Project?
So what we're looking at is a transition from industrial to information age technologies. And so industrial technologies brought reading and writing as literacies that you needed to access, right? So computers bring quantitative literacy on the table, just like reading and writing. So algebra now, while the planet is transitioning, is available as an organizing tool. So we are using algebra as an organizing tool for educational and economic advancement, just like we use the vote for political advancement.
So just as the freedom schools were connected to a sense of citizenship through literacy, the Algebra Project is in part about this math literacy. So part of why I wanted to connect this education as a civil rights part of it, Judith, is because living as I do in New Orleans right now, before I moved to North Carolina, I am watching what looks to me like a closure of certain kinds of basic civil rights around public education as the Recovery School District in New Orleans goes to an all-charter system. I understand that you all actually have a suit about this.
Sure, we filed a Title VI complaint in New Orleans, but with local community folks out front who have been fighting this fight because they see the collapse of the public school system. And what that means for children of color in particular is that they will be closed out of the opportunity to learn. And in fact, we were just talking about in Mississippi, what is being launched this summer by the Mississippi NAACP and One Voice is an actual ballot initiative to get a constitutional amendment for a right to education in the state of Mississippi. And so I think that we are seeing this kind of organizing that Mr. Moses is so well known for, and Ella Baker. We're seeing it across the country where communities have decided to take on the civil rights issues of this decade, of this generation, on their own.
And yet there is still a basic resource question. So I know as we were sort of researching here that you're still working on getting just $5,000 in order to get the Algebra Project to Mississippi this summer. We talked with Walter Kimbrough, who's the head of an HBCU in New Orleans earlier, about funding. Part of the movement is having the resources to do it. Where are the contemporary resources for building a sustainable movement?
Yeah, so for education, we need a national tax on education, right? And I think Roberts said it. He said in terms of the healthcare, Congress has the right to tax, right? So we need, the states don't have any money, the cities don't have any money. So we really need people to understand that what's at stake in the 21st century, that the young people in this country have to be elevated to a constitutional status for purposes of their education. Otherwise, they're not going to make it. But we were looking at the serfs of the 20th century who were the sharecroppers in the Delta, Mississippi. So we're growing serfs in our cities. Now, any kid who leaves high school with the equivalent of an 8th grade education is bound for serfdom in the 21st century.
We are growing serfs in our cities because of our lack of a fundamental civil right to education. Bob Moses, I am honored by you being at my table. Thank you so much for being here, and thank you for your continued and for your decades of work. Thank you, Judith, for spending time with us today. And that is our show for today. Thanks to all of you at home for watching. I will see you again tomorrow morning, 10 a.m. Eastern. Tomorrow we're going to do something a little different here on MHP Show. We're going to talk about the politics of parenting, from policies impacting parents to pressures on new moms to lose the baby weight, to the billion-dollar baby business. And dads, we're not going to forget about the dads. So come on back tomorrow. I promise you, it's going to be different and a lot of fun. The politics of parenting. Right now, it's time for a preview of Weekends with Alex Witt. Hi, Alex.
Hey, you know